In the fading light of an autumn evening in New York's Lower East Side, a young woman's silent scream for help went unheard by everyone around her. 27-year-old Serafina Cole had spent her entire life in silence, but tonight, that silence might kill her. Trapped in a nightmare she couldn't voice, hunted by 3 men who knew she couldn't call for help. She was running out of time, out of options, and out of places to hide, when she burst through the doors of an upscale cafe, desperately signing to strangers who looked at her like she was insane. She had no idea that the man sitting by the window with his little daughter was the most dangerous Mafia boss on the East Coast. She didn't know that he had learned sign language for a sister he couldn't save, and she certainly didn't know that Vincent Moretti, the man whose name made grown men tremble, would become the answer to prayers she didn't know how to speak. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. If this story moves you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so you never miss another story. The autumn night had turned the streets of New York into a beautiful trap. Just a few hours before that fateful moment, Serafina Cole was still wiping down the last glasses at the bar where she worked the night shift, the clock on the wall pointing to 2 a.m. while her legs had gone numb after 18 straight hours of labor. Mornings spent cleaning offices for a law firm in Manhattan, afternoons waiting tables at a small neighborhood diner, and nights serving drinks here until the final customer left. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, and still not enough, never enough. And when she stepped outside the bar, the cold of the New York autumn night struck her face like a slap. She pulled out her phone to check it, and her heart sank at the message from the hospital, saying the balance for Oliver's heart surgery had to be paid within 2 weeks, $60,000, the number dancing before her eyes like a death sentence. She had borrowed from Mancini to save Oliver, and now she was paying for that choice with every day lived in fear. Serafina closed her eyes for a second, and memories crashed over her like a flood. The night of the fire 15 years earlier, when she was only 12, flames swallowing their small home, swallowing her parents, leaving 2 orphaned children alone in a cold world. The years with the aunt who took the government money to raise them but treated Serafina like an animal. The beatings for not hearing her call, the days locked in a dark closet for daring to cry, meals of dry bread, while the woman and her own child ate hot meat. She had survived it all, had taken Oliver and run when she turned 18, and she had sworn to protect him at any cost. Serafina shook her head and forced the dark memories away. She needed to get home, to rest for a few hours before the morning shift began. But the refrigerator was empty, and she needed food, so she stopped at the 24-hour grocery on the corner and quickly grabbed a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a few eggs. And only when she stepped back outside did she realize she had left her phone at home, plugged in beside her bed. A small mistake. A mistake that could kill her. She saw them immediately, 3 dark figures under a street lamp across the way, and she recognized Tony, Mancini's trusted enforcer who had been tailing her for 2 weeks now. He was no longer keeping his distance. He was staring straight at her with the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Serafina quickened her pace, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned left, hoping she was imagining it, but she was not. The 3 shadows turned left as well. She started to run. The grocery bag fell from her hand without her noticing, but she did not stop. She sprinted into the narrow alley between 2 aging buildings where the stench of rotting trash and urine burned her nose. She could not hear footsteps behind her, did not know how close they were, and that silence was more terrifying than any sound. She only knew to run as if her life depended on it. Because it did. Serafina burst out of the alley and found herself on a wider street where a few people were still passing by despite the late hour, and hope flared in her chest like a small, fragile flame. There were people who might help her. She saw a young couple walking toward her hand in hand, laughing softly as if the world were entirely safe. Serafina rushed toward them, both hands raised, her fingers moving wildly in sign language. "Please help me. Someone is chasing me. Please call the police. Please." The couple stopped, but not because they understood. They stared at her with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. The young woman clutched her purse tightly to her chest and stepped back as if Serafina herself were the danger. The man said something, his lips moving too fast for her to read, and then they walked around her, their steps hurried, never once looking back. Serafina wanted to scream, to shout in their faces that she was not crazy, that she was in danger, but her throat could produce only meaningless sounds she herself could not hear. She turned and saw the 3 dark figures emerging at the mouth of the alley, moving toward her with slow, confident steps, as if they knew she could not escape. She ran again. Ahead of her, An old man was pulling down the metal shutter of his small grocery store. Serafina rushed to him, grabbed his sleeve, signing her plea. Police? Please call the police. Phone, please. The old man startled and looked at her in confusion. He said something, but under the weak streetlight she could not read his lips. She pointed toward the 3 men approaching, tried to convey the danger with her eyes, with the terror etched across her face. But the old man only shook his head, pointed to his ear, then waved her away like an annoying stray dog. He turned his back, slipped through the back door of the shop, and disappeared, leaving Serafina standing there with her heart shattered. She leaned against the cold brick wall, her legs no longer strong enough to hold her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot and bitter. She felt like she was drowning in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by water, by people, yet no one could hear her cries for help. She was invisible. She did not exist. Only a silent ghost in a world of sound. Memory dragged her back into the past, to the dark room in her aunt's house, to the cramped closet where she was locked away whenever the woman's rage flared. She remembered pounding on the door, pounding until her hands were bruised, pounding until she had no strength left. No one came, no one heard. And now, 15 years later, she was still pounding on the door, still screaming in silence, and still no one heard her. A hand seized her shoulder and spun her around. Tony stood there, the grin on his face stretched wide and grotesque. He said something, and though she could not hear it, she knew it was a threat. She wrenched herself free, shoved him back, and ran, running without knowing where she was going, only needing to get away from him, away from that hand. She slammed into a trash bin and fell hard to the ground, her knee striking the pavement with a sound she did not hear but felt as pain tearing through her body. Blood seeped out, staining the torn denim red, but she did not stop. She forced herself up, limping, and in that moment she saw it, the warm yellow light of a cafe at the end of the street, like a lighthouse in the darkness. Her final hope, Serafina hurled herself toward that light with every ounce of strength she had left, not knowing that behind that door, her fate was waiting. The glass door of the cafe flew open with a sound Serafina could not hear, but one she knew was loud enough to make everyone inside flinch. She burst in like a storm, and in an instant, every gaze in the room turned toward her. Moretti's cafe was a world utterly unlike anything Serafina had ever known. Crystal chandeliers spilling warm golden light over carefully polished oak tables and chairs, the rich scent of freshly roasted premium coffee mingling with the sweetness of warm pastries, elegantly dressed patrons sipping their drinks and conversing in low, unhurried tones as if the world beyond the door simply did not exist. And in the midst of that refined setting, Serafina appeared like an undeniable stain, her hair wild and matted with sweat and alley grime, her clothes filthy and torn at the knee, where blood still seeped through the fabric and dripped onto the pristine wooden floor, her face streaked with tears, her eyes frantic like an animal driven into a corner. She was the perfect contradiction to everything around her, and she knew it. But she had no other choice. Serafina rushed to the nearest table, where a middle-aged couple were enjoying a late dinner, the woman wearing a pearl necklace, the man in a finely tailored gray suit. They looked up at her, and their expressions shifted from surprise to disgust in less than a second. Serafina raised both hands, her trembling fingers cutting through the air. "Please help me. Someone is trying to hurt me. Please call the police. Please." The woman recoiled as if Serafina carried a disease. The man frowned, his lips moving in irritation as he said something she could not hear. Then he waved her away like an annoying fly without even meeting her eyes. Serafina turned to the next table where a group of 4 men in expensive suits were seated. Businessmen, she guessed. Men with phones, with power, with the ability to help her. She hurried toward them, hands still signing frantically, eyes pleading, but they stood up before she could reach them, sliding their chairs back, creating distance, as if she were some dangerous virus. One of them shook his head, said something to his colleague, and together they turned their backs on her. Somewhere in the cafe, a shrill female voice rang out. Serafina could not hear it, but she saw a blonde woman pointing at her, mouth opening and closing repeatedly, likely calling security or demanding that someone throw her out. Serafina spun through the cafe like a panicked animal trapped in a cage, moving from table to table, hands still signing, eyes still begging. Yet everyone avoided her. Some turned their faces away. Some pretended to look at their phones. Some stood up and moved to another table. No one understood her. No one wanted to understand her. She was surrounded by dozens of people, and yet she had never felt so alone. It felt like drowning in a sea of humanity. She could see them. She could touch them. but they looked straight through her as if she did not exist. She was a ghost. She was nothing. She was a silent scream. No one cared to hear. Serafina's knees buckled. She wanted to collapse right there, to curl up on the cold wooden floor and accept her fate. She had fought her entire life, had held herself together day after day, and she was so very tired. Maybe this was her end. Maybe she had been born to endure, and now she no longer had the strength to endure anything more. Tears soaked her cheeks, but she did not bother to wipe them away. She simply stood there in the elegant cafe with blood seeping from her knee and her heart in pieces, waiting for the inevitable. Serafina sensed the change before she saw it, the air inside the cafe seeming to thicken, to grow heavier, and she noticed several patrons turning their curious gazes toward the entrance. She turned her head, and her heart stopped for a breathless, suffocating moment. 3 dark figures stood in the doorway, Tony in the center, the other 2 flanking him like sentinels. The glass door slid shut behind them, and in that instant, Serafina knew there was nowhere left to run. Tony stepped into the cafe with the easy confidence of a man who owned the world, dressed in a black leather jacket. His hair slicked back neatly, and on his lips the smile Serafina had seen in countless nightmares, the smile of a predator that had driven its prey into a corner and was savoring the moment before the final strike. He glanced around the room, his lips moving as he said something to the curious onlookers. Serafina could not read it all, but she guessed he was apologizing for the disturbance, perhaps inventing some story about a mad girl or a mentally ill relative who needed to be taken home. And like a dark miracle, they believed him. One by one, they turned back to their tables, back to unfinished conversations, back to cups of coffee growing cold. No one looked at Serafina anymore. No one cared. She was erased from their minds as if she had never existed. Tony's 2 men moved to either side, blocking the front and back exits of the cafe. There was no escape. Serafina backed away step by step until her spine hit the edge of a table, and she felt the vibration of clinking cups through the wood, felt the irritation of the seated guests as they shoved her away. Tony advanced toward her slowly, 1 step at a time, as if he had all the time in the world. And he did. He knew she could not run. He knew she could not cry for help. He knew she was completely and utterly powerless. When he stopped a few steps in front of her, he leaned down so his face was level with hers, his lips moving deliberately, making sure she could read every word. "Mancini wants to see you. Come quietly, and no one gets hurt. Make trouble and your crippled little brother dies first." Serafina trembled like a leaf in a storm. She knew what Mancini wanted from her. He had made it clear during their last meeting, another way to repay the debt, the trafficking ring he controlled, the money she would be worth if she accepted her fate, and if she did not, Oliver would pay the price. Tears streamed down her face now, but they were no longer tears of hope. They were the tears of surrender, of someone who had fought to her last breath and still lost. She looked around the cafe one final time, at the people calmly sipping their coffee as if nothing were happening, and she understood a brutal truth. No one was going to save her. In this world, people like her were not worth saving. She closed her eyes, ready to accept her fate, ready for Tony to drag her out of the cafe and deliver her into the hell Mancini had prepared. But in the instant before darkness swallowed her completely, Serafina opened her eyes one last time, not out of hope, but out of the final survival instinct of a creature on the brink of death. She swept her gaze around the cafe once more, taking in the unfamiliar faces indifferent to her fate, the warm golden lights that now seemed to mock her despair. And then her eyes stopped, at the table beside the large window where the streetlights outside blended with the interior glow to form a strange halo. A man was seated. He wore a black suit, the kind of suit Serafina knew could be worth the total of several months of her wages combined. His face was sharply carved as if cut from stone, his features so precise they bordered on ruthless. His dark hair slicked neatly back, and his eyes, steel gray, the color of a sky before a storm, were fixed directly on her. Yet what froze Serafina in place was not his powerful appearance. It was his gaze. Unlike everyone else in the cafe, he did not look at her with annoyance or disgust. He did not turn away or pretend she did not exist. He was looking at her, truly looking, with something in his eyes she could not name, not pity, not curiosity, but as if he were reading every fear in her heart, as if he understood exactly what she was going through. Beside him sat a little girl about 4 years old, her feet swinging above the floor, her mouth chewing a piece of chocolate cake. She had softly curled black hair like her father's, round eyes like chestnuts, and clutched tightly in her arms a worn brown teddy bear. The child was looking at Serafina too, but not with the fear most children might feel at the sight of a stranger covered in blood and tears. She looked at her with the pure curiosity of childhood, as if trying to understand why the older woman was crying. Serafina did not know what drove her then. Perhaps instinct, perhaps despair pushed to the edge of madness, perhaps something deeper, something beyond logic. But her feet began to move. She walked toward the table by the window, ignoring Tony standing behind her, ignoring the threat still echoing in her mind. She moved like a sleepwalker, as if an invisible thread were pulling her toward that stranger. Tony said something behind her, perhaps an order to stop, perhaps another threat, but Serafina did not turn around. She had nothing left to lose. If this was her final attempt, she would make it. When she reached the table, Serafina dropped to her knees. Her bleeding knee struck the cold wooden floor, and pain tore through her body. But she did not care. She looked up at the man, and tears streamed down her face like small rivers, carrying all the pain and fear of 27 years of life. Her hands trembled so badly they could barely form the shapes. But she forced herself, one sign at a time, slow and clear, as if these were the last words she would ever be allowed to say to the world. Please help me. Those men want to hurt me. I am deaf. I do not have a phone. Please, please. The little girl stopped chewing, her wide eyes fixed on Serafina without blinking. She hugged the teddy bear tighter against her chest as if seeking comfort, yet showed no fear. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, watching Serafina's fingers move through the air with an expression as though she were trying to understand something very important. Serafina waited. She waited for the familiar rejection, for the dismissive wave, for the averted gaze. She had prepared herself for it, prepared herself to be turned away one final time, before Tony dragged her into eternal darkness. But what happened next changed her life forever. The man did not speak. For a moment that felt endless, he simply looked at her, those gray eyes moving over every detail of Serafina's tear-soaked face, over her trembling hands still frozen in the shape of the final sign, over the bleeding knee pressed against the wooden floor. Then he slowly set his coffee cup down on the table, the porcelain touching wood without a sound in Serafina's silent world. Yet she could see the motion clearly, could sense the care and intention behind it. He leaned forward, and then the miracle happened. His hand lifted. His fingers began to move. Not the awkward or random gestures she had seen so many times before, but signs somewhat stiff from years of silence, yet precise and deliberate, memories of a language returning to him when it mattered most. I understand you. You are safe now. Sit here. Serafina froze. She was certain she was dreaming, certain this was a hallucination created by a mind pushed beyond its limits, conjuring the one thing it desired most to soften despair. But no. Those fingers kept moving, kept forming words she could read as clearly as a printed page. My name is Vincent. This is my daughter Rosalie. Sit beside her. No one is allowed to touch you. 27 years. Serafina had lived 27 years in silence. She was used to being misunderstood, used to the blank stares when she tried to communicate, used to feeling like she was speaking to walls. She had built defenses around her heart, learned not to expect anything, learned to survive on her own because no one could help her in a world of sound. And now, in her darkest moment, when she was ready to surrender everything, someone heard her, someone understood her, someone saw her not as a burden or a nuisance, but as a human being in need of help. Her legs finally gave out. She could no longer kneel. Her body sagged and she had to brace herself against the floor to keep from collapsing completely. Tears burst free like a broken dam. But these were no longer tears of fear or despair. They were tears of release, of faith reborn from ashes, of someone who had been drowning suddenly feeling a hand close around hers. She cried without sound, her shoulders shaking in waves, no longer trying to hold it back, letting everything pour out. 15 years of enduring alone, 15 years of relentless struggle, 15 years of silent screams that no one had answered, all of it breaking open in that moment. A small hand touched Serafina's arm. She looked up through her tears and saw the little girl, Rosalie, gazing at her with wide, worried eyes. The child had slipped off her chair without Serafina noticing, and now stood beside her, still clutching the teddy bear in one hand. Her lips moved, and though Serafina could not hear, she could read the simple words, "Sit with Rosie. Rosie has a teddy bear to protect you. Do not cry." And then the child did something that shattered Serafina's heart completely. Rosalie lifted the worn teddy bear and placed it in Serafina's lap, as if it were the most precious gift she possessed, as if that frayed old bear held real magic, able to chase away fear and make everything right. Serafina pulled the teddy bear to her chest, and wrapped her arms around the small girl standing before her, holding them both, her body still trembling, tears still falling. Yet somewhere deep in her chest a small flame flickered to life, the flame of hope she had believed extinguished long ago. Vincent signed again, his movements slow and deliberate, making sure she could read every word through blurred vision. "Stand up. Sit in the chair beside Rosalie. I will handle this. Do not be afraid." Serafina nodded, hardly believing she could still move. She pushed herself upright with the help of the table, and Vincent gently guided her into the empty chair beside his daughter. Rosalie immediately climbed back onto her own seat and pressed close to Serafina, one small hand still holding hers as if afraid she might disappear. For the first time in this long night of terror, Serafina felt that she could breathe. She was not safe yet. She knew that. Tony was still there somewhere behind her, and the threat had not vanished. But she was no longer alone. For the first time, in a very long while, she was not alone. Vincent stood up, and in that instant Serafina witnessed a strange transformation. The man who had just signed to her with such gentleness, who had looked at his daughter with quiet warmth, became something entirely different. His gray eyes darkened, cold as a frozen lake in winter. The lines of his face hardened, sharp as a blade. He fastened the buttons of his suit jacket slowly, every movement precise and deliberate, like a general preparing to step onto a battlefield. Before leaving the table, he turned back to Serafina and signed briefly, "Stay here, do not worry." Only 4 words. Yet the way he signed them, the absolute certainty in the movement of his fingers, made Serafina believe he could do exactly what he promised. She nodded, one hand still gripping Rosalie's, the other holding the teddy bear the child had given her. Vincent glanced toward a nearby table, where a large man in a gray suit was seated. Serafina had not noticed him before, but now she saw in him the same dangerous aura as Vincent, like a wolf hiding its fangs beneath smooth fur. Vincent said a few short words to the man, nothing more, and the man immediately rose, his eyes sweeping the room as if assessing the situation. Marcus Romano, the right hand of the Moretti Empire, had received his orders. Then Vincent moved. He walked toward Tony and his 2 men with the stride of a predator closing in on its prey, unhurried, unhesitating, each step solid and commanding. The entire cafe seemed to freeze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Spoons stopped stirring. Eyes turned toward the man in the black suit crossing the room as if he owned it. And he did. Serafina could not hear, but she could see Tony's reaction when he realized who was approaching him. The blood drained from his face in an instant, his skin turning from flush to corpse white. The 2 men behind him reacted the same way, one even stepping back as if his survival instinct were screaming at him to run. Vincent stopped in front of Tony, only a single step away. He did not need to stand closer. The distance was enough to show he felt no fear, and enough for Tony to understand he was facing a force he could not oppose. Serafina watched Vincent's lips move, straining to read his words. "What are you doing in my cafe?" The sentence looked cold and absolute even without sound. Tony stammered in reply, his lips trembling so badly Serafina could barely follow. But she understood the meaning. A debtor, Mancini, a job he had been sent to do. The weak excuses of a man cornered. Vincent listened, then smiled. But it was not a smile of pleasure or satisfaction. It was the smile of a predator before tearing into its prey. A smile that made all 3 men in front of him tremble like leaves in a storm. He spoke again, slowly, deliberately, turning slightly so the light caught his face, allowing Serafina to catch the sharp, distinct movements of his lips. "Her debt now belongs to me. She has nothing to do with Mancini anymore. Go tell your boss that." Tony nodded frantically, perhaps believing he had escaped. But Vincent was not finished. He stepped half a pace closer. Close enough now that Tony could feel the presence of the Mafia boss looming over him. "And if I see anyone from Mancini come near her again," Vincent continued, and Serafina saw Tony's face turn even whiter, "I will send every piece of your bodies back to him in gift boxes." The 3 men vanished from the cafe so fast, Serafina barely saw them move. The glass door slammed shut behind them, and the room remained deathly silent for several seconds before whispers began to ripple through it. But Serafina did not care. She only watched Vincent walking back toward the table, his expression softening the moment his eyes found his daughter, and she wondered whether she had just been saved by an angel or by a devil. Vincent returned to the table and sat down across from Serafina, and the moment his gaze fell on his daughter, the ruthless coldness she had just witnessed dissolved like morning frost under sunlight. He lifted a hand and gently brushed Rosalie's hair, and the little girl looked up at him with a smile, chocolate still smudged at the corner of her mouth. Rosalie then turned toward Serafina and began babbling about the teddy bear, her tiny hands fluttering through the air. She did not know sign language, but she was trying to communicate in her own way, with smiles, with bright eyes, with innocent gestures, and something warm spread through Serafina's chest as she watched the child. She smiled for the first time that night, a fragile smile but a sincere one. Vincent observed the interaction between his daughter and the unfamiliar woman for a moment. Then he raised his hand and began to sign. "They are gone. You are safe now. Tell me what happened. Why were Mancini's men chasing you?" Serafina hesitated. She was not used to telling her story to anyone. For 27 years, she had learned that no one wanted to listen, no one cared, and that her problems could only ever be solved by herself. But this man had saved her. He had stood between her and the world when everyone else had turned away. At the very least, she owed him the truth. She began to sign, her hands still trembling slightly, but far steadier than before. She told him about Oliver, her 19-year-old brother, the only family she had left in the world. She told him about the congenital heart condition he had carried since birth, about living every year in fear that his small heart might stop without warning. She told him about the surgery Oliver needed for a chance to live, and about the enormous sum of money she could not obtain by any legal means. She told him about her parents' debt to Mancini, a debt she had known nothing about until they died in the fire, and the collectors appeared before 2 orphaned children. Mancini had loaned her parents money to open a small tailoring shop, and when they were gone, he demanded that she pay. She had been paying for 15 years, but with interest breeding upon interest, the debt only grew larger, like a monster that could never be fed. Then Oliver fell gravely ill, and she had no choice. She went to Mancini and begged him for another loan to save her brother. He agreed, but with conditions that were now tightening around her neck like a noose. $60,000. Serafina signed, and she felt the weight of that number in every movement of her fingers. He gave me 2 weeks to pay, but I work 3 jobs and it is still not enough. I clean offices during the day, wait tables in the afternoon, work at a bar at night. I sleep 4 hours a day, sometimes less, and it is still not enough. Never enough. She told him about the crumbling apartment in the slum where she lived. Walls cracked, roaches everywhere, gunshots echoing each night like a familiar song. She told him about meals of nothing but bread and water so she could save money for Oliver, about sleepless nights spent wondering what tomorrow would bring. She told him about the last time she saw Mancini, about the way he looked her up and down with a gaze she knew all too well, and said there were other ways to pay if she did not have the money. She knew what he wanted. She knew about the trafficking ring he ran, about the girls sold into hell who never came back, and she knew that if she had been taken tonight, that would have been her fate. Vincent listened from beginning to end without interrupting, his face unreadable, still cold as stone. Yet Serafina sensed something shifting in those gray eyes. Not pity. She did not want pity, but something else, something deeper she could not name. Rosalie had fallen asleep at some point, her head resting against her father's shoulder, one small hand still holding Serafina's as if unwilling to let go, her breathing slow and peaceful, utterly unaware of the heavy conversation unfolding around her. Vincent looked down at his daughter, then back at Serafina, and in his gray eyes she saw him thinking, calculating, reaching a decision, and she did not know whether that decision would save her or destroy her. Vincent remained silent for a long moment after Serafina finished her story, studying her with unreadable gray eyes that made her feel as though he were seeing straight through to her bones. Then he lifted his hand and began to sign, every movement slow and deliberate. "You owe Mancini $60,000. Now you owe me." And Serafina's heart sank like a stone dropped into deep water. She had escaped one devil only to fall into the hands of another. She had heard of Vincent Moretti, who in this region had not, the head of the Moretti Mafia empire, the man who controlled the entire northeastern United States, whose name alone could make the hardest criminals tremble, and now she owed him $60,000. She did not know whether the fate awaiting her in Vincent Moretti's hands would be better than the one Mancini had prepared. But Vincent continued to sign, and what he said stunned her. "But I am not asking for money. I have another proposal." Serafina watched him warily, unwilling to trust what she had just read. If not money, then what did he want? She had learned that everything had a price, and that what came free was often the most expensive of all. Vincent looked down at Rosalie, sleeping in his arms, and for the first time, Serafina saw something fracture in his cold exterior. Pain, fear, the desperate love of a father looking at his child and knowing she would face something he could not stop. "My daughter Rosalie," Vincent signed, his fingers pausing for a brief second as if holding emotion at bay, "is losing her hearing. The doctors say that in 1 to 2 years, she will be completely deaf. Serafina looked at the peacefully sleeping child, angelic and unaware of the storm ahead, and her heart tightened. She understood, more than anyone else ever could. She knew what that silent world was like, knew the isolation of standing among crowds yet being alone, knew how unbearable it was when no one could hear you, and this small child would soon enter that world. Vincent continued, I need someone to teach her sign language. Not an ordinary teacher. I can hire anyone for any price. But I need someone who understands what she will face. Someone who can show her that life does not end when sound disappears. Someone like you. Serafina said nothing, only watched him and waited. You will work for me for 1 year, Vincent signed. Teach Rosalie sign language. Help her prepare for the future. In return, the $60,000 debt will be erased. You will receive a salary, safe housing in my estate, and I will cover all medical costs for your brother. Oliver will have the best doctors, the best hospital, and you will no longer have to worry about money. Serafina felt the world spin. This was an offer that could not be refused in the truest sense. Everything she needed, everything she had dreamed of, everything she had fought for over 15 years was being laid before her. Yet she also knew she would be stepping into the den of one of the most dangerous mafia bosses in America, living under the roof of a man who minutes earlier had threatened to tear 3 men apart as if it were nothing. She looked at Vincent, then at Rosalie, then back at Vincent. She thought of Oliver lying in the hospital with his fragile heart, of sleepless nights, worrying about money, of the crumbling apartment, and 3 jobs draining the life from her, of the future without escape she had seen only hours earlier. And then she signed a single word, a word that would change her life forever. Yes, I agree. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Serafina's crumbling apartment. She had been awake all night packing her few belongings into an old suitcase, and when she stepped out of the sagging doorway for the last time, she did not look back. There was nothing in that place worth missing. Marcus Romano, the man she had seen in the cafe the night before, stood beside the car waiting for her. He said nothing, simply opened the door and waited as she climbed inside. During the drive, Serafina watched the city change beyond the window, the decaying buildings of the slums giving way to more elegant neighborhoods, then disappearing entirely as the car turned onto a tree-lined road leading out toward the suburbs. And then she saw it. The Moretti estate rose before her like a castle from a fairy tale, though the kind of dark fairy tale told to children to frighten them into obedience. The main house stood 3 stories tall, built of gray stone with imposing white columns, massive oak doors looming at the entrance, tall windows reflecting the morning sunlight like dozens of watchful eyes. The garden stretched out like a vast green carpet, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a marble fountain at its center, and everywhere men in black suits stood guard, their eyes scanning everything with the alertness of predators. Serafina stepped out of the car and felt like a stain on this flawless picture. The old suitcase in her hand, the simple clothes on her back, all of it screaming that she did not belong here, but she had no time to dwell on it. A woman of about 32 stepped out through the front doors, her brown hair neatly pinned back, her expression warm yet professional. She smiled and held up a small handwritten sign that read, "My name is Nina, Rosalie's nanny. Welcome. I will take you to your room." Serafina nodded, surprised and grateful that someone had thought to communicate with her in a way she could understand. She followed Nina inside the mansion, and with every step her sense of overwhelm deepened. The main hall soared upward with painted ceilings and glittering crystal chandeliers. A sweeping stone staircase curved toward the upper floors like a ribbon of white silk. Oil paintings lined the walls, fresh flowers adorned polished tables. Everything radiated a level of wealth, so extravagant it felt unreal. Nina led her to the second floor, down a long corridor carpeted in deep red, and stopped before a wooden door. She opened it and stepped aside to let Serafina see inside. The room was larger than the apartment Serafina had lived in for 9 years. A large bed with crisp white linens stood at the center beside a window overlooking the garden. There was a wardrobe, a desk, a sofa, and a door leading to a private bathroom with a white porcelain tub, and in one corner glass doors opened onto a small balcony where she could see the sky and breathe fresh air. Serafina stepped inside, set her old suitcase down on the gleaming wooden floor, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was so soft she nearly sank into it and had to brace herself with her hands. She looked around the room, at the velvet curtains, at the large mirror in its gilded frame, unable to believe this was real. Only 12 hours earlier she had been running through dark alleys with blood on her knee and tears on her face, certain she was about to die, and now she was sitting here in a room like a dream, inside the mansion of the most powerful mafia boss in the Northeast, Life truly was a series of unforeseeable turns. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Nina appeared with another sign. "Rosalie wants to see you. She is in the playroom on the first floor." Serafina nodded and followed her downstairs. And the moment she stepped into the playroom, a small pink whirlwind rushed toward her. Rosalie, dressed in a pink dress and white ballet flats, ran up and wrapped her arms around Serafina's legs as if they had known each other forever. The little girl looked up with bright round eyes, and her lips formed words Serafina could read clearly. "Sister Sarah, Daddy says you will teach Rosie how to talk with hands. Rosie wants to learn now. Rosie wants to learn a lot." Serafina knelt to meet her at eye level, her heart melting completely at the child's innocence. She smiled and raised her hands, slowly forming the first sign, "Hello." Then she gently took Rosalie's tiny hands and shaped her small fingers into the correct form, guiding her to follow along. Rosalie concentrated with fierce seriousness, her tongue peeking out as she tried to imitate the movement, and when she succeeded, a radiant smile bloomed across her angelic face, brighter than sunlight itself. And in that moment, Serafina knew she had made the right choice. No matter how uncertain the road ahead might be, no matter that she was living under the roof of a devil, at least she was finally doing something that mattered. The days that followed drifted past like a strange dream Serafina still could not quite adjust to. She woke each morning in a spacious room filled with sunlight filtering through the curtains, ate full meals she did not have to cook herself, and spent most of her time beside the sweet little Rosalie. Yet she gradually realized that the Moretti mansion was more than a luxurious home. It was a fortress, a command center, a place where decisions capable of changing the fate of hundreds were made every single day. And the man who stood at the center of it all, Vincent Moretti, was a mystery she could not decipher. The first time she truly saw the face of the Mafia boss was on the third day after her arrival. She was walking along the first-floor hallway looking for Rosalie, when she happened to glance through the slightly open door of the study. Vincent was seated behind his desk, facing a middle-aged man kneeling on the floor, his face drained of color, sweat soaking his brow. Marcus and two other men stood nearby like stone statues. Serafina could not hear a word, but she could read Vincent's lips as he leaned forward and spoke to the man on his knees. She caught only a few words, yet they were enough to make her shiver. Betrayal, family, consequences. Then Vincent gestured to Marcus, and the man was dragged away like a sack of garbage. Serafina did not know what fate awaited him, and she did not want to know. She stepped back, her heart racing, and quickly left the hallway before anyone noticed her watching, but the image burned itself into her mind. Vincent's gray eyes then were no longer the cold steel she had seen in the cafe. They were the color of a storm, of merciless cruelty, of a man who could destroy anyone who stood in his way without hesitation. And then, only a few hours later, she saw a completely different Vincent. She was teaching Rosalie in the playroom when the door opened and he walked in. Instantly, the little girl sprang up and ran toward her father like a small pink missile. "Daddy is home. Daddy, I learned a new word today. Sister Sarah taught me how to say butterfly." Vincent bent down to catch his daughter, lifted her into his arms and spun her around, sending Rosalie into peals of laughter. His face transformed entirely. No coldness, no knife-sharp edges. He was smiling. A real smile that reached all the way into his gray eyes and lit them as if touched by sunlight. Rosalie chattered excitedly about everything she had learned that day, her tiny hands fluttering through the air as she tried to copy the signs Serafina had taught her. Most of them still imperfect. Vincent listened to every word, nodding, praising her, and occasionally pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead with a tenderness Serafina could scarcely believe belonged to the same man who had made another tremble on his knees only hours earlier. That evening, as she passed Rosalie's room, Serafina paused at the doorway and looked inside. Vincent was sitting on his daughter's bed, a fairy tale book in his hands, reading to her. He changed his voice for each character, shrill for the witch, warm and deep for the prince, making Rosalie laugh endlessly. And when the child began to yawn, Vincent closed the book, tucked the blanket up to her chin, and bent to kiss her forehead. His lips moved, and Serafina read the words, though he did not know she was watching. "Daddy loves you more than anything in the world, my little princess." Serafina stepped back, her heart beating in a chaotic rhythm for reasons she did not fully understand. Vincent Moretti was a man with two faces, or perhaps two entirely different men living within the same body. She did not know. But she was beginning to understand one thing. Perhaps the devil everyone feared also had a heart that had been wounded too deeply, forcing him to build walls around it simply to survive. The weeks that followed unfolded in a rhythm Serafina gradually grew accustomed to. Each morning after breakfast, she and Rosalie met in the playroom, and the lessons began. Yet these were never dry lessons with chalk and blackboards. Serafina turned everything into games, into adventures, into vivid little stories that made Rosalie eager to learn each day. The child progressed with astonishing speed, like a small sponge absorbing every bit of knowledge offered to her, one day learning the names of animals, the next learning colors, the day after learning how to express emotions. Rosalie remembered each sign with remarkable accuracy, and every time she succeeded, the radiant smile on her angelic face became the greatest reward Serafina could imagine. Rosalie began calling her Sister Sarah and followed her everywhere like a shadow. Wherever she went, she wanted Sister Sarah there. Whatever she ate, she wanted Sister Sarah beside her. Even during afternoon naps, she insisted that Sister Sarah tell stories with her hands. Serafina had never been needed like this before, and the feeling was both sweet and frightening. She began to love this little girl, and she knew that love always carried the risk of pain. Then Vincent began to appear. At first he only lingered outside the playroom door, leaning against the frame as if merely passing by, but Serafina noticed he stood there for a long time, gray eyes following every movement of his daughter, every smile when she learned something new. Then he started stepping inside, sitting in a chair in the corner, watching in silence with an expression Serafina could not read. Rosalie was the one who broke the distance. One afternoon, while learning the signs for family, the child suddenly turned to her father and tugged at his hand. Daddy has to learn too. If Daddy does not know how to talk with hands, how will Daddy talk to Rosie later? Sister Sarah, teach Daddy. Vincent looked at his daughter, then at Serafina with a rare hesitation for a Mafia boss. Serafina smiled and nodded, inviting him to join. And so Vincent Moretti, the man who made the entire northeastern United States tremble, sat down on the floor beside his daughter and began learning sign language like a child. He already knew the basics from when his sister Lucia was still alive, but years of disuse had erased much of it. Serafina guided him patiently, correcting each finger when he made a mistake, trying not to think about the fact that she was touching hands that had once ordered deaths. Rosalie laughed delightedly whenever her father got something wrong, and corrected him with the seriousness of a tiny teacher. Daddy, you did it wrong. It should be like this. Sister Sarah, Daddy learned so badly. Vincent pretended to pout like a scolded child, and Rosalie immediately wrapped her arms around him to comfort him. It is okay, Daddy. Try again. Rosie will teach you. And then something miraculous happened. Vincent laughed. Not the cold smile Serafina had seen when he faced Tony in the cafe. Not the polite, empty smile he gave his men, but real laughter rising from deep in his chest, lighting up his gray eyes and drawing soft lines at their corners. The laughter of a father happy with his child, a sound that had likely been buried for a long time beneath the ice of the Mafia boss. Serafina watched the scene before her, the powerful father sitting cross-legged on the floor, his small daughter climbing into his lap to fix his fingers, and she realized she was smiling. She realized that beneath the ice, Vincent Moretti was a father doing everything he could for his daughter, and perhaps, just perhaps, he was not entirely the devil the outside world believed him to be. That night, Serafina could not sleep. She lay on the soft bed in the luxurious room while her mind was far away. In a hospital dozens of miles from here where Oliver was lying, she had received a message from the doctor a few hours earlier. The first surgery had been successful, but there were complications. Oliver needed another operation. The cost would increase, and the situation was more serious than they had expected. The doctor said her brother was stable for now, but no one could promise anything. Oliver's heart had always been fragile, and every surgery was a gamble with fate. Serafina left the bed and stepped onto the balcony. Yet the air inside still felt suffocating. She needed to go outside, to feel the night sky above her head, to find a place where she could cry without being seen. She quietly left her room, went down the stairs, and walked into the garden behind the mansion. The garden at night was beautiful, like a sorrowful dream. Moonlight spilled over the rose bushes, painting silver streaks across the petals. The fountain stood silent, its surface smooth as a mirror reflecting a sky filled with stars. Serafina made her way to an ancient oak tree at the corner of the garden, sat down on the grass, and finally allowed herself to break. She cried in silence, as she had always cried for 27 years, her shoulders shaking in waves, tears soaking her cheeks, yet not a single sound escaped. She thought of Oliver, of her 19-year-old brother whom she had raised like her own child, of the small boy who had once clung to her hand during cold nights when the two of them had nowhere to go. She thought of Oliver's smile, of the way he always tried to be brave, even knowing his heart could stop at any moment. Oliver was everything she had. If she lost him, she would have no reason left to keep fighting. She was crying so hard that she did not notice someone approaching, until a white handkerchief appeared in front of her. Serafina looked up, and in the pale moonlight she saw Vincent standing there. He did not speak, did not sign. He simply offered the handkerchief, and then sat down beside her under the oak tree. The distance between them was close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him, yet far enough that she did not feel intruded upon. They sat like that for a long time, two silent figures beneath the night sky. Finally, when Serafina had wiped away her tears and steadied herself, she raised her hands and began to sign. She told him about Oliver, about the doctor's message, about the fear tightening around her heart. She told him that her brother was the only family she had left, that she had fought for 15 years to keep him alive, and that she did not know who she would be if she lost him. Vincent followed every movement of her hands, his gray eyes never leaving her for a second. When she finished, he lifted his hands and signed slowly. "I will take care of the cost, all of it, the new surgery, the medicine, the best doctors. Do not worry." Serafina shook her head, her hands moving faster with emotion. "That is not part of our agreement. You have erased my debt and given me work. I cannot take more." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and in his gray eyes, she saw something she had not expected. Not pity, but understanding. "You gave my daughter something money cannot buy," Vincent signed. "You gave Rosalie hope. You showed me that she will be all right, that the future is not as frightening as I believed. What I do for your brother is the least I can do in return." Serafina looked at him, and in that moment she saw something beneath the cold armor of the Mafia boss. Loneliness, deep and vast. The same loneliness she had carried in her own heart for 27 years. Perhaps they were not so different after all. Perhaps beneath different circumstances, they were simply two people trying to protect the ones they loved. They sat in silence a while longer, and Serafina thought Vincent would eventually stand up and leave. But he did not. Instead, he lifted his gaze to the night sky, his eyes distant, as if fixed on a past only he could see. Then he raised his hands and began to sign. The movement slow and heavy, as though each word carried the weight of an entire lifetime of pain. "I had a sister. Her name was Lucia. She was deaf from birth." Serafina froze. She had known Vincent could use sign language, but had never asked why. She had assumed it was for work, for convenience, for some practical reason. She had never imagined this. Vincent continued, his eyes still turned toward the sky, as if he could not bear to look at her while telling the story. "I was 10 when Lucia was born. My parents were busy with business, with the empire, with hundreds of things they considered more important than a deaf child. But I was different. The first moment I saw her in her crib, I knew I would protect her at any cost." He told her about their childhood together, about teaching himself sign language from books when he was only 10 years old, spending hours every day practicing until his hands moved fluently, about the joy on Lucia's face the first time someone truly understood her, truly spoke with her, truly heard her silent voice, about afternoons spent sitting in the garden, Vincent telling stories with his hands while Lucia laughed, the purest laughter he had ever known. "Lucia was the light of my life," Vincent signed, and Serafina saw his fingers tremble slightly. She was innocent, pure, untouched by the dark world our family lived in. She only knew how to love, how to trust, how to see the world with hopeful eyes. And I swore I would protect those eyes, that I would never let anything cloud that innocence. But he failed. Vincent told her about the night 17 years earlier, when he was 19 and Lucia was 16. The Moretti family was at war with a rival gang, and the enemy had discovered their weakness, not money, not territory, but a 16-year-old deaf girl with an angel's smile. They kidnapped Lucia from her school. They demanded my father surrender, hand over the entire empire. My father refused, believing they would not dare do anything, believing he could negotiate, believing that power mattered more than a daughter's life. He was wrong. They killed Lucia. 3 days after the kidnapping, they sent her back to us, in a box. Serafina lifted her hand to cover her mouth, even though no sound escaped. Nausea rose in her throat, her heart tightening under the weight of the man's pain. Vincent did not cry. His gray eyes were dry, but within them lay a bottomless abyss of grief and guilt. "I was not there to protect her," he signed. "I promised I would always be by her side, but that night I was at a party with friends. I was drinking and laughing while my sister was dragged into a car by murderers. I broke my promise, and she died because of it." He told her what came after, about standing at Lucia's grave and swearing that no one he loved would ever be harmed again, about becoming ruthless and cold, turning himself into the monster the underworld feared, about wiping out the gang that had killed Lucia one by one without mercy, about building the Moretti Empire into something untouchable so no one would ever dare hurt those he loved again. I became a devil so no one would dare touch the people I protect, Vincent signed. And then for the first time since he began, he looked directly into Serafina's eyes. That night in the cafe, when I saw you, I saw Lucia, a deaf girl in despair, screaming for help that no one could hear. I could not save my sister, but I can save you. Tears slid down Serafina's cheeks and she did not wipe them away. She only looked at the man beside her, a man who had carried 17 years of pain on his shoulders, and she understood. She understood his coldness, his cruelty, and why on that fateful night he had not hesitated to save a stranger. Because to Vincent, she was not a stranger at all. She was Lucia. She was the second chance he had never been given with his sister. Vincent fell silent for a while after finishing Lucia's story, as if he needed time to gather the shattered fragments of those painful memories. Then he let out a heavy breath that seemed to carry the weight of an entire lifetime, and continued to sign, but fate did not release me. After Lucia, I met Catherine, my wife. Serafina listened without interrupting, knowing that Vincent was opening the most private chambers of his soul, places he may never have shared with anyone, and she honored that trust. Vincent told her about Catherine, the woman who had melted the ice he built around himself after Lucia's death. She was not afraid of me, he signed. Everyone else was afraid, but Catherine was not. She saw the man behind the devil, and she loved that man. They married, and a year later, Rosalie was born. Vincent said it was the happiest day of his life, the day he believed that after so many years of suffering, life had finally smiled on him. But that happiness did not last. When Rosalie turned 1, doctors discovered she had a hearing problem. Tests revealed a rare genetic condition that would cause her hearing to deteriorate gradually until it vanished completely. And the gene came from Catherine? She did not know she carried it. Vincent signed, his fingers slowing as if each word caused him pain. When she learned the truth, Catherine collapsed. She believed it was her fault, believed she had cursed our daughter with a life of silence. She could not forgive herself. Then Catherine was diagnosed with cancer. The disease came swiftly and brutally, taking her within a single year. Rosalie was 2 years old when her mother died, too young to understand why her mother was gone, too young to remember the nights Catherine held her, crying and apologizing for something she could not control. Catherine left with guilt that would never be resolved. Vincent signed, and she left me alone to face the greatest fear of my life. Serafina immediately understood what he meant. Rosalie, the 4-year-old girl with the angelic smile, the clear laughter, the star-bright eyes, a child slowly losing the ability to hear the world, with nothing anyone could do to stop it. I hired the best doctors, Vincent signed. I searched everywhere, willing to pay any price to cure my daughter. But there is no way, no miracle, no hope. My daughter will lose her hearing completely within 1 to 2 years, and I can do nothing to change that. He stopped, and in the darkness Serafina saw his shoulders tremble. I kill without hesitation, Vincent signed, something breaking in every movement of his hands. I built an empire. The underworld fears. I can destroy anyone who stands in my way. But I cannot protect my daughter from this. I cannot fight the disease stealing her hearing. I am completely powerless. Serafina looked at him, and in the pale moonlight, she saw what she never thought she would see. Vincent Moretti, the most feared Mafia boss in the northeastern United States, was crying. Silent tears slid down his sharply carved face, vanishing into the darkness like pearls of grief. For the first time in 17 years, I am afraid again, Vincent signed, his hands trembling so badly Serafina could barely read. Not afraid of enemies, not afraid of death. I am afraid my daughter will be isolated in a silent world. I am afraid she will suffer as Lucia suffered. I am afraid she will feel alone, invisible, misunderstood, and I am afraid that no matter how much I love her, I cannot protect her from that. Serafina did not think. She acted on instinct, on the tightening of her heart, at the pain of the man beside her. She reached out and took Vincent's hand, her fingers threading through his as if trying to pass him the warmth he so desperately needed. Vincent froze, his body going rigid for a brief moment as though he were unaccustomed to being touched this way, touched in comfort rather than fear. But he did not pull away. With her other hand, Serafina began to sign, slowly and firmly, making sure he could read every word even as his eyes were still blurred with tears. Rosalie will not be isolated. She has you, she has me, and she will have an entire community of people like her waiting to welcome her. Vincent looked at her, gray eyes filled with doubt, as if he did not dare believe what he was seeing. But Serafina did not stop. She continued signing, her movements carrying the truth of someone who had lived 27 years in the very world he feared for his daughter. Being deaf is not the end. I am living proof, she told him about her life. Not the suffering she had already shared, but the parts she had never told anyone, about the deaf friends she had found in the community, about gatherings where people spoke with their hands and laughed as if sound had never mattered, about successful deaf people she knew, doctors, lawyers, artists, people who had proven that silence could never stop anyone from living a full life. My life was not easy, Serafina signed, but not because I am deaf. It was because I was an orphan, because I was poor, because I had no one beside me. If I had had a father who loved me the way you love Rosalie, if I had had the support and resources you can give your daughter, my life would have been very different. Rosalie has everything, I did not. She will be fine. She will be more than fine. She looked straight into Vincent's eyes, unflinching and unwavering. I can show Rosalie that she can be happy, that she can love and be loved, that she can chase any dream she wants, that she can be whole, because being deaf does not define who she is. It is only one part of her, like the color of her eyes or her hair. Nothing more, nothing less. Vincent remained silent, but his eyes never left her. Serafina continued, knowing this was what he needed to hear most. You could not save Lucia. That was not your fault, even if you do not believe it. I know you have carried that guilt for 17 years, but you can be there for Rosalie. You can walk with her into her new world. You can learn sign language with her, laugh with her, show her that no matter how the world changes, your love for her does not. That is the only thing that matters. That is the only thing Rosalie needs. Vincent looked at her for a long time, and Serafina saw something shift in his gray eyes, the ice slowly melting to reveal something warmer, softer, more human beneath. He did not speak or sign. He only tightened his grip around her hand as if clinging to the only lifeline in a storm, and they sat like that in the night garden, two lonely souls finding each other in the darkness, needing no words to understand that from this moment on, neither of them would have to face their fear alone again. The weeks that followed passed in a fragile happiness Serafina scarcely dared believe was real. She taught Rosalie every day, watched the little girl progress bit by bit, and felt her heart grow steadily bound to the child. As if Rosalie were her own, Vincent appeared more often during the lessons, and whatever stood between them had shifted after that night in the garden. No longer employer and employee, but something else, something she did not dare name. Oliver was also recovering well after the second surgery, and for the first time in her life, Serafina allowed herself to imagine a future without fear. But darkness never allows light to shine undisturbed for long. Word spread through the New York underworld that Vincent Moretti was protecting an unknown deaf girl. Whispers circulated about the mysterious woman living in the Moretti estate, about the feared Mafia boss threatening Mancini for her sake, about the strange bond between the most powerful man in the Northeast and a woman who had once been nothing more than a desperate debtor. To Derek Mancini, this was not merely the loss of a debt. It was humiliation. He had built his empire on fear, and Vincent's open protection of his prey was a slap in the face he could not accept. He swore revenge, and he found a way. That night, as Serafina was preparing for bed, her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number with a video attached. She opened it, and her world collapsed. Oliver, her brother, bound to a chair, his mouth taped shut, his face bruised as if he had been beaten, his eyes wide with terror, and she could see him trying to say something through the tape, perhaps calling her name, begging her to save him. Behind him, a stained brick wall and dim yellow light. Nothing to identify the location. Nothing but her brother and the absolute fear on his face. The message beneath the video was brief and merciless. If you want him alive, come alone. Location to follow. Tell Moretti, and the kid dies. Serafina dropped the phone, her body shaking so violently she could barely stand. She leaned against the wall, slid to the floor, and felt as if her heart were being crushed in an invisible fist. Oliver, the little brother she had raised since childhood, the only person she had left in this world, now in Mancini's hands, a man who would not hesitate to kill him if she disobeyed. She knew what she had to do. She had no choice. Serafina forced herself to stand on trembling legs and began to write letters, one to Vincent explaining everything and apologizing for leaving without goodbye, one to Rosalie saying that Sister Sarah loved her very much and wished her happiness. She placed the letters on the table, took her coat, and quietly opened the door. The hallway was dark and silent as she started walking with a heart heavy as stone. But she had taken only a few steps when a door flew open and a small figure appeared in the light. Rosalie stood there in pink pajamas, eyes still drowsy, but when she saw Serafina with her coat and bag, she was instantly awake. "Where are you going, Sister Sarah?" the child asked, her voice trembling. "You are not leaving Rosie, are you? You promised. You said you would stay with Rosie." Serafina dropped to her knees and wrapped the child in her arms, tears spilling uncontrollably. She could not lie to this child, but she could not let Oliver die either. She was trapped between the two people she loved most, and whichever choice she made, she would lose a part of herself. "What is going on?" Vincent's voice came from the hallway, and Serafina looked up to see him approaching, his face taut with alarm. He saw the letter in Rosalie's hands. The child had slipped into Serafina's room and taken it without her noticing. Vincent read it, and his face darkened like a sky before a storm. Serafina stood, trembling, and handed him the phone with the video. No explanation was needed. The images said everything. Vincent watched, and what happened next stunned her. He gripped her shoulders, gray eyes locked onto hers with burning resolve. "You will not go alone," he signed. "Mancini dared to touch someone who belongs to me, and he will pay in blood." Everything happened so quickly that Serafina could barely breathe. Vincent summoned Marcus, and in less than an hour the Moretti estate transformed into a war command center. Men in black suits moved everywhere, weapons were checked, plans were exchanged, and Serafina sat in the living room watching it unfold like a fever dream, her heart pounding wildly with fear for Oliver. Vincent knelt in front of her, gray eyes locked onto hers with absolute seriousness, signing slowly so she could read every word. "I will bring your brother back, I promise. But I need you to trust me and follow the plan. Can you do that?" Serafina nodded, even though she did not know what the plan was. She only knew that if anyone in this world could save Oliver, it was the man kneeling before her. Vincent's plan was bold and dangerous. Serafina would go to the location Mancini specified as bait, drawing his attention while Marcus's team infiltrated from the rear to rescue Oliver. She would not be alone, Vincent assured her. Someone would be watching over her from a distance, but she would need the courage to face Mancini alone for a few minutes. Serafina did not hesitate. For Oliver, she would do anything. The location turned out to be an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, perfect for dark dealings that wanted no witnesses. When Serafina stepped inside, her heart hammered until it hurt, but she forced herself to keep walking. Dim yellow lights hung from the ceiling, casting broken shadows like a nightmare. Mancini stood in the center of the warehouse, and Oliver was tied to a chair right beside him. Her brother looked worse than in the video, his face deadly pale, sweat drenching his hair, and his chest heaving with labored breaths. But his eyes lit up when he saw her. He tried to say something through the tape, perhaps telling her to run, but Serafina did not run. She moved forward, her legs shaking yet unyielding. Mancini smiled when he saw her, the grin of a predator who had finally trapped his prey. He said something and Serafina read the filthy words on his lips about what he would do to her, about the money she would make him in his trafficking ring, about how foolish she was to believe Vincent Moretti would protect her forever. Serafina did not react. She simply stood there, letting Mancini talk, buying time as Vincent had instructed. Every second that passed was a second closer to Oliver's freedom. Every second she endured Mancini's vile gaze was a second nearer to her brother's rescue. Then everything happened at once. Gunshots erupted behind the warehouse, doors burst open, and Vincent Moretti walked in like an avenging god from hell. Serafina had never seen him like this. His gray eyes were the color of storm and death, his face carved from stone, and every step he took carried the weight of hundreds of lives he had ended. The Moretti men flooded in from every direction, overwhelming Mancini's crew like a tidal wave crushing fragile boats. In less than 2 minutes it was over. Mancini was restrained by 2 men, his face drained of color as he realized he had lost. Vincent stepped in front of him and Serafina saw him say something that made Mancini tremble violently. She could not read everything, but she saw the words "my people and love" on Vincent's lips, and her heart skipped a beat. Vincent turned to Marcus, gave an order, and Mancini was dragged away, not to be killed, Serafina later learned, but to be handed over to the police along with every piece of evidence of the trafficking ring he had run. Some enemies deserved a swift death, Vincent said, but Mancini deserved to live and suffer through hell on earth behind bars. Serafina ran to Oliver, trembling hands tearing the tape from his mouth. "I am sorry," she signed, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry I let you be dragged into this." Her brother, weak and trembling, managed a faint squeeze of her hand. I knew you'd come, sis. I'm still here. You came. You always come." They clung to each other, 2 orphaned siblings who had survived countless storms together, and Serafina cried, as she never had before, crying from relief, from Oliver's safety. From the end of the final nightmare, Vincent stood watching them. And when Serafina looked up, she saw something in his gray eyes she never thought she would see. He walked over, knelt beside her, and raised his hands to sign, his fingers moving slowly, deliberately, as if these were the most important words he had ever spoken. I do not know how to love someone. I only know how to protect and how to destroy. But with you, I want to learn. I want to learn how to love you. If you will give me the chance. Serafina looked at him, the man who had saved her in her darkest night, who had opened his soul to her when the world feared him, who had brought his entire empire to rescue her brother. She signed back, tears still flowing but now filled with happiness. You were the only one who heard me when the whole world did not. I am not afraid of you, Vincent. I never was. I am only afraid of losing you. 1 year later, Moretti's cafe still glowed with its familiar warm golden lights on a Saturday autumn evening. Yet everything was different. The same table by the window, the same sunset painting the streets of New York in shades of gold. But no fear remained, no desperation, no deaf girl fleeing through the night. Instead, there was a family. Vincent sat in his usual place, but the cold emptiness beside him was gone. Serafina sat close at his side, her shoulder resting naturally against his, as if they had shared a lifetime together. Across from them sat Rosalie, now 5 years old, her eyes still bright as stars, small hearing aids tucked behind her ears and decorated with sparkling butterfly stickers she had chosen herself. And beside Rosalie was Oliver, now 20, his heart healed, laughing with the little girl as though they were true siblings. Rosalie called him Brother Ollie, and Oliver called her his little princess, and the bond between them made Serafina's eyes sting every time she saw it. Dinner unfolded in laughter and conversation woven seamlessly between spoken words and sign language. Rosalie now moved between both worlds with effortless grace as if she had been born bilingual. Her hearing had declined noticeably over the past year, yet she was not afraid. She faced the change with the courage of a tiny warrior because she knew she was never alone. When dessert arrived, Rosalie suddenly stood up, her small face adorably serious. She looked around the table to be sure everyone was watching, then lifted her hands. Serafina instantly recognized that her daughter was about to sign, and instinctively tightened her grip on Vincent's hand beneath the table. Rosalie's small fingers moved carefully, slowly and precisely, clearly practiced many times. I want to say something to Mommy Sarah. Serafina covered her mouth in shock. Mommy Sarah? Rosalie had never called her that before. The child continued, eyes shining as she looked straight at Serafina. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for showing me that I do not have to be afraid. I am not afraid anymore. I know that no matter how quiet the world becomes, I will still hear everyone's love. Then she turned to Vincent and signed on. Thank you, Daddy, for bringing Mommy Sarah to us. Thank you, Daddy, for loving me. Finally, she looked at Oliver. Thank you, Brother Ollie, for being my brother. I love my whole family. The table fell silent. Serafina cried, tears of happiness streaming freely down her face. Vincent cried too. For the first time since that night in the garden, he let his tears fall without restraint. Oliver cried as well, the young man astonished by how deeply he could love a child not bound to him by blood. Rosalie panicked when she saw them all crying. Did Rosie say something wrong? Why is everyone crying? Serafina laughed through her tears, pulling the little girl into her arms. No, my love. You did not say anything wrong. You said the most beautiful thing in the world. Mommy is crying because she is happy. Vincent stood and wrapped both women of his life in his arms, and Oliver joined them, forming a warm circle in the middle of the cafe. The surrounding guests watched with curiosity and quiet emotion, but the small family did not notice. They only knew they were together, and that was all they needed. When everyone finally calmed down, Vincent signed to Serafina, Do you regret it? Trusting a stranger that night. Serafina smiled, a smile that reached all the way into her eyes. You were never a stranger, Vincent. You were the man I waited for my whole life without knowing it. You were the answer to prayers I never knew how to speak. Vincent leaned down and kissed her. A gentle kiss in the middle of the crowded cafe, while Rosalie squealed in delight and Oliver pretended to cover his eyes. Outside the window, the autumn sunset painted the New York sky the same way it had 1 year earlier. But everything had changed. The girl who once ran in despair had found her family. The cold Mafia boss had learned how to love. The little girl losing her hearing had found her voice. And the young man with a fragile heart had found people willing to protect him at any cost. Vincent looked at his family and remembered that fateful night a year ago. He had believed he was the one who saved Serafina, the hero of her story. But the truth was far more beautiful. Serafina had saved him. She had pulled him from the darkness of his past, from the shadow of Lucia, from the terror he carried for Rosalie's future. She had saved Rosalie from the loneliness he once thought unavoidable. She had brought light into a cold fortress and turned it into a true home. They had saved each other, and perhaps that was the greatest miracle of love. Not one strong person rescuing someone weaker, but two imperfect souls finding each other in the dark and walking together into the light. This story has come to an end, but its lessons remain. Sometimes the darkest moments of our lives lead us to the most beautiful connections. Sometimes people enter our lives at the exact moment we need them most. And sometimes allowing ourselves to be vulnerable before a stranger is the first step toward finding the family we never knew we were searching for. If this story touched your heart, if you cried, smiled, and hoped alongside Serafina and Vincent, please like and share this video with those you love. Subscribe to our channel so you do not miss more moving stories updated every day. We would love to know how you felt about this story. Have you ever met a stranger who changed your life? Do you believe in destined encounters? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one with sincere gratitude. And finally, we wish all of you watching good health, a life filled with joy, and peaceful days, surrounded by those you love. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Goodbye, and we hope to see you again in the next video.